No? Yeah, okay.
You
good.
can reach that one. Ah.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 5th meeting of the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee. Welcome to all the committee members today, our staff and members of the public who are viewing either with us in the room or perhaps through the closed caption in the City Hall building. You are welcome to follow the agenda and the debate on your computer, tablet, or smartphone. You can log into www.toronto.ca/council. The Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee acknowledges the land that we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including that of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. And Toronto is now home to many diverse nations, Inuit, Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Now, before I ask for declarations of interest, I want to just do a round of introductions as we generally have at this particular committee. I'll start with my name, and maybe we can just go around the inner horseshoe, then we're going to go to the outer ring where the staff are sitting. And if you have a microphone in front of you, what would be helpful is just turn the light on. That means your microphone's on, and you can just state your name. So I'm Kristen Wong-Tam, chair of the committee, and also councillor representing Toronto Centre. Nice to see everybody today.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jennifer Ling. I'm from City Clerk's office. I'm supporting Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Carol Kostonen. I also work with Jennifer in the City Clerk's office.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Bhuvani. I'm a committee member, and my pronouns are she and her.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Michelle Petrides. I'm a TAC member as well. My pronouns are she and her, and I work in the developmental services sector.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Wendy Porch. My pronouns are she and her as well. I'm a committee member, and I'm the executive director of the Centre for Independent Living in Toronto.
So we'll just finish this side of the horseshoe, and then we'll start going to the outer ring.
Hi, my name is Michael McNeely. I'm a RTAC member. I'm with my interviewer, Gabriel.
Good morning, I'm Deirdre Boyle. I'm an accessibility consultant in the People and Equity Division at the City, and my pronouns are she and her.
Hi, I'm Liv Mendelson. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a member of this committee, and I'm the Director of Accessibility and Inclusion at the Miles Nadal JCC.
Hi, good morning. I'm Jason Michelle, committee member, and happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Great, wonderful. What we'd like to do is now go to the outer ring.
Good morning. My name is Lindsay Wigginton. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a project manager for automated vehicles in the Transportation Services Division at the City.
Hi, everyone. I'm Fahad Khan. I work with Transportation Services. I'm a project lead on automated vehicles at the City of Toronto, Transportation Services.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lorraine Hewitt. I work with Councillor Wong-Tam in her office, and I'm supporting her at the TAC Committee today.
Good morning. My name is Mazen Aribi, the 2019 ACAT chair. I'm here as an observer. Thank you.
Morning, Nagin Chamshuri. I'm with Municipal Licensing and Standards.
Hi, everyone. Jordan Thurgood, also with Municipal Licensing and Standards.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go to the staff on this side of the room, if that's all right, unless you folks want to introduce yourselves at the back. I know you don't have microphones. Okay. So we're going to come to the side. Thank you.
My name is Annette Snovietz. I'm with the Solid Waste Management Services Division.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Charlotte Ueda with Solid Waste Management Services Division.
My name is Emily Marmorio. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm with Solid Waste Management as well.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Dan Boulos. I'm also with Solid Waste Management Services.
Good morning. I'm Robin Shilett from the Public Consultation Unit.
I'm Gina Ng, and I'm here with Angela Machado. We're from the clerk's office, and we're here to observe today.
Morning, everybody. Lynn Genova, and I support this committee.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to acknowledge that we also have Marlene, who's helping us with real-time captioning, and our personal support worker and assistant is Victoria. They're all here to provide support to our committee, so thank you, everyone. I'm going to ask, are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? This is specifically for our TAC members. No? Seeing none, we can proceed. I also just want to highlight that we've got two special new features in Committee Room 1. One is there's now designated wheelchair accessible areas in the public seating area, and you can see that there's 4 spaces that are allocated. And there's now a brand new push-button automatic door that's on the west side of the room, which is my left and potentially your right, but it's just on that side. So I'm just going to do a quick agenda review, and we're going to run through it very quickly. I recognize, thank you very much. I should also acknowledge that this is obviously a called special meeting. We didn't quite have quorum last meeting, and we wanted to make sure that there were comments that specific staff needed to have before they can proceed their policy work to the next level. So our first item is the DI 5.1, the chair's report. I'm going to hold that and deliver on it shortly. DI 5.2 is the automatic shuttle trial accessibility review. We will hold that matter. There is a presentation for staff. DI 5.3, which is the temporary signs bylaw review accessibility feedback. DI 5.4, single-use and takeaway items reduction strategy phase 2 consultation accessibility feedback. We're also going to be hearing from staff on that one, so these are all held. And then DI 5.5, the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee 2020 meeting dates. There's also the terms of reference that have been stated, meaning that we will hold up to 6 meetings per year and additional meetings if needed at the direction of the chair or co-chairs. This is probably the one item that's not too controversial and won't require a lot of debate. Is there, do we need to hold that item, or can we proceed to adopt it? Yeah, okay. Anybody want to move to adopt it? Okay, Michelle, I saw you itching there. So, all those in favor of adopting our meeting dates for 2020? Okay, any opposed? That carries. Thank you. So great, we got one item off our agenda. Good work, folks. All right, so moving back to item number 1, which is the chair's report. This is the chair's report that I tabled for September 26th. It is contained in a 2-page write-up. I'm going to go through it a little bit more quickly because you've now had a month, 2 months, no, a month and a half to read it. But starting with managing emergencies in apartment buildings. At the July 16 to July 19 meeting, City Council supported amending the Toronto Municipal Code to require building owners and operators to develop a vital service disruption plan to better serve residents during prolonged disruptions of a building's vital services. This was actually a pretty important step. We did this largely because of the ongoing problems that we have seen in high-rise buildings. By way of 650 Parliament, you know that there was a massive fire. 1,500 people got displaced, and they are still not back home. What happens when we have incidents that that see buildings disrupt their vital service, how do they make sure that vulnerable individuals, people who are living with mobility devices or perhaps illness, how do you get them down 50, 60 stories and so forth? Until this point, the City of Toronto did not have a strategy, so I'm very pleased to say that I helped initiate this work and that we now have amended the rent safe TO bylaw, and every single building owner has to lodge and create a vital service disruption plan with the City of Toronto, and now this is enshrined in bylaw. So I'm very pleased about that. Licensing of vehicles for hire at our July 16 and 19 City Council meeting, we adopted amendment for the city's vehicles for hire bylaw to improve the safety and accessibility of taxi cabs, limousines, and vehicles operated by private transportation companies such as Uber and Lyft, and specifically trying to address safety measures. The city is introducing an accessibility fund to help offset the higher cost of operating wheelchair accessible vehicles. This program will be funded through a regulatory charge on all the members of the industry, so they pool those funds together, and those who are operating accessible vehicles will then be able to draw from that fund, and this will all be administered by city staff. So I think that's a very positive step, because many members who are driving those accessible vehicles were saying that they were needing some financial assistance, and the commitment from the City of Toronto is to keep them on the road because it is a very vital service, and in order for us to do that, we had to come up with some subsidies, and so that's what that represents. Provincial health cuts. I've attended a meeting back in August when everybody, I think, was on vacation, but this is a pretty important discussion. I did that largely on behalf of our committee. This was being organized by the Ontario Health Coalition to address the provincial government's $22 billion cuts to provincial health care. And this includes ambulatory care I can tell you that it's fairly public at this point in time. It's not necessarily my chair's report, but on November the 9th, there will be a very large public health rally at Nathan Phillips Square. I understand there are members from the GTA that are all coming in to specifically voice their concerns about provincial downloading. I know that there are rallies being held across Ontario at various times and dates to protest the health cuts. So that's what happened there. Priority retail streets zoning bylaw amendments. I met in September with city planning staff regarding an upcoming report, I should say. This is around priority retail streets and designating the new bylaw. It's sort of harmonizing bylaws that are sort of created across the downtown core, but they wanted to add a few more streets to designate them as priority retail. What I brought to that table as the chair of TAC was that I reinforced the need to make sure that all the entrances had to be fully accessible, and the visibility of windows should also be considered. They were looking at the built form and some of those urban design considerations. I believe it was well received. Also continuing along with the chair's report, I attended on behalf of TAC a grand opening at the Chartwell Grand, Sumac Chartwell Grand, which is a brand new long-term care facility in the Regent Park neighborhood. There were some flag raising and proclamations that were held at the city, one for the Canadian Paramedic Committee, the Dystonia Awareness Month of September, the World Duchenne Awareness Day, and Rehabilitation Day, September 17th. So those were some of the flag raisings and proclamations, and that brings me to the end of my my chair's report. If I can have a motion to receive. Great. Liv, all those in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. That carries. Thank you very much. So coming to item number 5.2, which is the automatic shuttle trial, I'd like to invite Lindsay to the front. Hi, Lindsay. Nice to see you. I know you have a presentation for us. And when you're ready, I think it's already on the screen, or will be shortly.
Good morning. Good morning, Councillor and committee members. Thank you for having us. As I mentioned, my name is Lindsay Wigginton. I'm a project manager for automated vehicles and transportation services, and I'm here with my colleague Fahad Khan this morning to share with you a project update on the automated shuttle trial. This is a project we've been working on for some months, but there's still a lot of work to do, and we're really coming to you this morning looking for some feedback on where we're at and where we might need to go from here. So my presentation is going to be about 10 minutes this morning. In that, I'm going to cover just a little bit about vehicle automation in transit. What are we talking about? Then brief you on what our specific project is, speak to you specifically about the accessibility requirements and safety considerations that we're considering, and then give you a sense of the timeline and where we're going from here. So what are automated vehicles? Vehicle automation refers to a range of technologies that can conduct some or all parts of the driving task, such as steering, acceleration, and braking. And typically automated vehicles use a range of sensors and computers to do this. So the image on this slide shows sort of from above a city street with buses and cars and pedestrians communicating with each other. And the sort of idea is that in the future, some of these vehicles could be automated and connected. The introduction of automated technologies into vehicles of all kinds could have benefits for the safety, accessibility, and efficiency of the transportation network. So when we think about transit specifically, the City of Toronto, along with our partners at TTC and Metrolinx, have been curious to learn more about what is the potential for automated vehicles in the transit system in the future. And in particular in this project, we're asking, is there an opportunity to fill existing gaps in the transit system? So not to reproduce service that's already being provided, but in fact to provide something different. In 2018, we applied to Transport Canada under a funding opportunity called the Program to Advance Connectivity and Automation in the Transit System. And we proposed to them that we conduct a trial with an automated transit shuttle in Toronto. This would be the first for Toronto. This is something that has been done elsewhere in the world, but typically isn't done in partnership with transit agencies. And so that's something that's quite exciting about what we're doing. So the image on the screen here shows an example of some of these shuttles. They're essentially a new and emerging product on the market. They're not exactly like another kind of vehicle you might have experienced before. They're kind of in size somewhere between like a Dodge Caravan accessible van and then on the low end, and then but smaller than a ProMaster sort of wheel-trans vehicle. So typically they'll hold between 6 and 15 passengers. They typically have a door that opens on the side, and then sort of bench seating around the perimeter is sort of the typical design. As I'll speak about in a moment, we haven't selected the vehicle for our project yet. What we're going to be doing is drafting a request for proposals and going to the market and asking the market to provide a vehicle. So the process we're in right now is coming up with all of the sort of norms and standards that we want the vehicle to have. So a little bit more about what is an automated shuttle. This is on slide 5. As I mentioned, automated shuttles are a new kind of transit technology. What we see on the market, and our team was able to conduct what we call a request for information last year, where we went to the market and just said, tell us what kinds of products and services you sell so we get an idea of what's out there. They have an ability to accommodate mobility devices like strollers, walkers, and wheelchairs. Typically, they're electric powered, which means they make less noise than a typical vehicle and don't produce emissions. They're low speed, so what we know is that they max out around 20 kilometers an hour, sometimes slower. As I mentioned, they're small, so carrying, it says here 8 to 12 passengers. It could be 6, it could be 15. Now, what's important to understand is that as we're watching the automated vehicles industry progress, there aren't vehicles that are fully automated yet, or at least these shuttles won't be. And so there will be a human on board at all times providing oversight, both to oversee the driving task, but then also to fulfill the typical customer service role that you would expect from a TTC operator. And that person would be trained to be able to provide that service as well. So we often get the question, why is this a driverless project that also has a driver? It's a great question. What we're really interested in as the city, TTC, and Metrolinx is understanding what the potential for this kind of technology could be in the transit system in the future. So this is a learning project. It's going to be time-bound. It won't be more than 6 to 12 months, and it's really about trying that out. But in the meantime, in terms of where it's at, it does still need that human oversight. So the image on this slide shows a different transit shuttle or automated shuttle. This is the one that's currently being used in Montreal in a similar project. It's stopped and the doors are open, and there's what looks to be a family with a child in a stroller that's getting ready to get in. You don't see it in this image, but as I'll speak about in a moment, these vehicles do have ramps in order to allow folks to access the inside. So where will the shuttle be deployed? As we were working to choose a location with our partners at TTC and Metrolinx, we looked for a number of factors. The most important one is that we're not looking to duplicate an existing transit service, so we looked for areas where we could fill a geographical gap outside of where TTC currently has coverage, and we're looking for opportunities to provide what we sometimes call a first mile, last mile service, so connecting an area that doesn't have transit to a major transit hub. And in this case, our preliminary preferred route is the Rouge Hill GO station. This is an accessible GO station in the east of the city. And we've initiated some public consultations with the community of West Rouge, which is around the Rouge Hill GO station. The image here shows actually the Rouge Hill GO station itself. It's morning rush hour, and there are a number of passengers boarding the GO train. So on slide 7, just to remind you really what are our goals in this project. As the city, it's really for us to understand the potential of automated shuttles to fill gaps in the future. And as I mentioned, after the trial is over, there's no current intent to scale it up or to continue it on beyond that point in time. We're also really interested in the human interactions with automated shuttles. So how do people with different needs and different lived experiences feel about riding the shuttle, and how do they access it? And this is part of what we're looking to learn and also sort of hear from communities about. And then finally, we're also interested to understand the technical requirements to operate such a shuttle. So from sort of a service planning perspective, what are the new skills and new approaches that we as the city might need to gain as we go forward? So just to give you a sense of the trial plan, as it stands currently, we hope to launch the service in fall of next year. So it wouldn't be for another year yet. There's a lot of work to be done between now and then. As I mentioned, the goal is to run for about 6 to 12 months. Passengers will ride for free, so there will not be a fare to board the vehicle. You will not need to use a Presto card. However, when the vehicle arrives at the GO station, if you're transferring to the TTC bus or to the GO train there, you would pay the fare normally as you always would. The concept is to run at morning and evening rush hour, so the times may shift a little bit, but essentially to connect for 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the afternoon with the trains that are coming into the station. One of the reasons why we chose this approach is that the vehicle being electric will also probably need a moment to recharge in the afternoon between those 2 hours of service. We've chosen a route that's short enough such that the vehicle can loop around about every 20 to 30 minutes. It will be a fixed route. We haven't selected that specific route yet. We have a number of options that we're looking at. And we likely anticipate that there will be some fixed stops. However, we're also going to be working with the vendor that comes on board to figure out what is the best method for hailing and locating the vehicle. So as you can imagine, there's a lot to think about in terms of when we are locating stops, how are we making sure that those are accessible, how are we making sure that they're identifiable, and what are the different ways that folks can access that. And just to say, we're coming to you now because we're kind of in the process of developing this service plan and developing the request for proposals for vendors. Nothing is carved in stone, and so we are really looking for feedback at this point. So before I close, I do want to say a bit about where we're at with the accessibility requirements for the automated shuttle. So this is slide 9. The image shows, this is a short demonstration with an automated shuttle that happened in Calgary. There's an individual in a wheelchair who is going up the ramp into the vehicle. So the detailed design does depend on which vendor we bring on board. The procurement process will be launched this fall, and we're hoping to bring them on board in the new year. What we do know is that we will obviously be requiring the vehicle and the service to apply with the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, or AODA, as well as the Highway Traffic Act, and then also to follow Metrolinx and TTC protocol and policies around what are the requirements for the vehicle, and also what are the practices around how people board and what kind of support they get from the customer service representative. On slide 10, a little bit more about where we're at with the accessibility requirements. We currently anticipate having some of the following. So again, in compliance with AODA and the Highway Traffic Act, making sure there are audible and visual next stop announcements inside and outside of the vehicle. Having a ramp. What we've seen on the market is that most of them offer a ramp that's manually deployable by the staff that's working on the shuttle. Some do have an automatic one. Obviously, making sure we're accommodating use by persons with disabilities who are accompanied by service animals, providing a securement device for mobility devices on the vehicle, asking the vendor to describe to us how they will maximize interior space for persons with mobility devices, so thinking about turning radius and how boarding happens, especially considering that there will likely be other passengers as well. And then if there are any accompanying mobile or web applications, making sure that those also follow best practices in terms of accessible design. Just to say a little bit about safety as well, of course, safety is a top consideration for us in this project. This is slide 11. We've taken into account a number of safety factors when choosing the route. Again, the vehicle travels at low speed, and this is also part of its safety function. And as we're looking for the vendor that we will ultimately choose through procurement, we're of course looking for those that already have a great safety track record in the deployments around the world that they've been involved in. So just to give you a sense of the timeline, we've been working on this since early last year. We're currently in fall 2019, where we've been undertaking public consultation and working toward issuing the request for proposal. And as I mentioned previously, the goal is to launch service in fall of next year. One important thing to note for the committee is that we are during the setup and testing period, so once we have a vendor on board, our consultation plan right now involves setting up a focus group with folks with disabilities so that they can interact with the vehicle early on, give us some feedback, and help us tweak things as needed. And that's the end of my presentation, so happy to take your questions and comments.
Lindsay, thank you for the presentation. So we've opened up the, oh, look at those hands go up. So I'm going to just start to recognize, starting with Joel at the very end, Jason at the very end, and then Michael, and then I'm going to come to Wendy.
Okay, thanks for your presentation. It was very interesting, very timely. A couple of quick questions. Is it just one vehicle you're looking at getting, and when it would just be do the round every like how long would it take to do the round? And how long would the wait time be? And you also mentioned that there is a trial currently happening in Montreal and Calgary. What type of vehicles are they using, and do you have any data from those trials that might assist?
Great question. So for the first one, the timing and the wait time, we are anticipating that we will most likely only have one vehicle. This is just based on the size of the grant that we're receiving. And so the distance of route we've chosen will hopefully provide such that it will loop around about every 20 or 30 minutes. And that would be designed to try to connect with the train departures and arrivals at the GO station. So you'd have it looping around, say, every 20 to 30 minutes for that 3-hour service period in the morning and afternoon. To the second question about precedents in other cities, we can definitely draw some lessons learned from them, and we call our colleagues at those cities often as we're sort of working to do this. What is different in the Calgary case is that it was a short 2-week demonstration. So in terms of how it really integrates into the transit system, whether it can really change behavior, there's not so much for us to draw on there. Our colleagues in Montreal, the project actually just launched like a couple of months ago, so there aren't full data to draw from yet, but we are watching that closely and monitoring it as well.
Okay, thank you. Jason, do you have any more questions?
I'm sure I will eventually, but I'm good for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Michael, to question.
Hi, I just wanted to make the recommendation that you consider people with disabilities to fulfill the customer service rule on board of this car that we're talking about, because I feel that in addition to demonstrating accessible passenger safety or accessible passenger options, it would also indicate accessible employment for people with disabilities. So I would appreciate you thinking about that. Thank you.
Thank you. I can take that comment to my colleagues at TTC and Metrolinx to consider.
Thank you very much. Wendy to question.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. It is really interesting, and it feels kind of like we're in the Jetsons. You know, we're flash forwarding to the future here. But my question has to do with how you selected the area that you selected for the trial. So it's Rouge Hill GO Station has been selected, as I understand. Now, how do you know that there are going to be people in that geographic area who use mobility devices or have disabilities who will participate in the trial? And if you don't know that, how will you ensure that there are people with disabilities who can participate in the trial?
Great question. So I'll start just with a quick overview of kind of how we chose the location. We have the benefit of working closely with our partners TTC and Metrolinx. So we undertook an exercise to identify sort of a long list of selection criteria. Chief among them was really this goal to serve an area outside of the existing TTC service. So as you might imagine, because TTC is mandated to cover 90% of the city within 400 meters of transit, that actually leaves 10% of the city remaining to take a look at. There were a number of other factors we considered. Because the vehicles are sort of in development, we wanted an area that has low traffic volumes. We wanted a place where we could connect to a major transit station, and so those were some of the factors that we took into consideration. We also used some of Metrolinx's information on what are the modes by which people are getting to the station currently, and so one of the use cases we're looking at is there are a number of people at that station who are driving a very short distance, under 2 kilometers to get to the station, and parking is at capacity. So one of the use cases is really, can we get some folks out of their cars and offer a different option for getting there? That being said, we've been meeting with the community. There are people in that community who don't own a car as well, and for whom this could be an option. We did not look specifically for there being a presence of folks with disabilities in the neighborhood. That wasn't a criteria. We have, through the consultation, met at least one individual who is in that case. So part of what we will need to do in order to make sure that we're learning in particular about how this vehicle serves folks with disabilities is to, for example, hold the focus groups like I was speaking about, to make sure that there are opportunities for that community to engage with it as well. But we as a team don't have statistics about the abilities of the people in that neighborhood.
So what it sounds like you're saying is that the trial will happen, but that you cannot know whether there are going to be people with disabilities who will take part, and that the only option for addressing that is the focus group.
The focus group is one. Certainly what we're hoping to do, so in terms of the public consultation, the 2 things we've done so far is door knocking on all of the possible routes that we'll be serving, and then also holding a public drop-in event. So as we get to know the community, we're also looking to hear from people what their specific needs are. So that's the other way in which we would identify folks with specific needs.
Any other questions? Yes, go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you for your presentation, Lindsay. It is really interesting. The only point that I wanted to make was around the quietness of the vehicles. So the low emissions and the quiet nature of them can be wonderful, but it can also be a safety issue. And you did say that there will be announcements inside and outside the vehicles, but maybe just keeping in mind that someone may not be able to hear that vehicle pull up. And if they have low vision, it could be an issue. So really concentrating on how to make sure they know that's arrived, or the person who's the human attendant really being able to identify if someone's not seeing the vehicle arrive and helping. And I would like to also say that Michael's idea is wonderful, and I think you should really, truly consider hiring people with disabilities to be the human attendants on the vehicles.
Thanks for that. And just a comment on the noise aspect, that is a comment we've heard, especially we've had the chance to brief the accessibility advisory committees of Metrolinx and TTC as well, not only with identifying the vehicle when it pulls up, but in fact just the safety of a very quiet vehicle circulating on local roads. And so right now we're monitoring, there's been some movement actually in the US to think about regulating that at a federal level around electric vehicles in general. So we'll also be asking the market sort of what are these shuttle manufacturers proposing in terms of best practices around that, but thanks for putting that on our radar.
I think we have another question coming from Jason, and then I see Liv's hand.
Thank you, Chair. Just as a follow-up to Michelle's question, would you consider putting as part of your criteria for your RFP this idea about the noise emission, that one of the criteria you're looking for is a vehicle that will identify itself to people that may have visual impairments or may not be able to hear it coming? Would that be part of your criteria?
It would be part of our criteria to meet the standards that the TTC currently has around that in terms of next stop announcements. Is that what you're referring to, or are you thinking?
No, more the idea that we're just talking about the fact that I can say from personal experience, a lot of the electric vehicles, as a blind person, you can't hear them coming.
Right.
So they're like, they could potentially be, you know, they're great for the environment, but they could be death traps for a person that relies on hearing the vehicle coming and can't hear it. So I'm wondering if that could be made part of the criteria for the RFP, that the vehicle has to have some way of announcing itself.
That is definitely the type of criteria that we could put in an RFP. So I think we can take that comment back and take a look at what our options are for doing that.
And thank you very much, Jason. Liv, 2 questions.
I'm just wondering, as you're putting together your RFP, and you mentioned some of the vehicles out there in the market have automatic deployment ramps and others have manual ramps, and you're going to use this study period to study this whole process with the idea that eventually there may be vehicles on the road that don't have a human attendant. I'm wondering how that will work. And I'm wondering if automatic deployment would make more sense if there isn't in the future an attendant in the vehicle who can deploy the ramp.
Yeah, thanks for that. Certainly, if there was a scenario in the future with no driver, it would have to be automatically deployable, as you mentioned. I think there would be, as it stands right now, we haven't decided to say that that's a must for us, given that we know we will have that human function. But for sure, the expectation would be in a future where there wouldn't be a driver, it's not an option for passengers to deploy a ramp, so the vehicle would need to find a way to provide that service. Along with, what we also know is that currently TTC customer service folks are there to also help people use wheelchair securements and other functions. So there are some serious questions about what really would it mean to not have a driver, and I don't think that we'll be using this project to learn more about that, but I don't think that the industry has a full answer to that yet.
Okay, Liv, I know you have a follow-up question.
I'm just wondering if it might make sense then, given that that is going to be the reality at some point, to look at adding that in the RFP so that you can actually study what that experience will be like for people with disabilities using the vehicle in the future.
Great, I can take that back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any final questions? Okay, seeing none. Oh, sorry, Bhuvani, my apologies. Bhuvani, 2 questions.
I just have a quick question. So earlier you mentioned that the vehicle would accommodate approximately 8 to 12 passengers. Approximately how many wheelchair users would it accommodate?
We're going to be asking the vendors to tell us that in their submissions to the RFP. To give you a sense of the size, some of the ones we've looked at are, one of the models is about 4.5 meters long and 2 meters wide. So you can kind of imagine, based on the norms around what a wheelchair securement device space needs, we're kind of in the process now of thinking about what would actually fit. But it is our direction to require at least one.
Yeah, please.
And just to speak to Liv's point earlier, so in terms of securing a device like a wheelchair, so in the future, if the vehicle would not have a person there, what kind of things have you explored in terms of how you would secure a wheelchair, or like those kind of refinements?
Yeah, exploring automated securement, I would say, is out of the scope in terms of like what we're going to be trialing in this. But we have been sort of learning more about some of the automated securements that are emerging on the market, but I don't anticipate that that's what we would have in this case.
Thank you. Any other questions? I just have one simple one. What would be the expected cost of this vehicle?
We won't be purchasing the vehicle. We'll be procuring a service that would then be removed sort of after the 6 to 12 month trial period. So I'm not actually able to say what a vehicle itself would cost.
What's the quantum of the grant that we received?
The grant is $365,000 from Transport Canada. But that also includes some sections of that funding that are for studies and accompanying work and for the evaluation support. I didn't mention, but the University of Toronto and the University of Ryerson are evaluation partners, and so not all of the $365,000 is going toward the procurement.
Okay. Thank you very much. Are there any folks to speak? Wendy, starting with you.
Thank you. I just wanted to come back to the idea of the trial, and I really wanted to emphasize that I don't think that you're going to have adequate data on the accessibility of the real use of this system if you don't find a way of making sure that people with disabilities are represented in your trial. So focus group discussions are helpful, but there is a huge gap between focus group discussions and actually seeing people with disabilities using the system over time. In the same way that you're planning to evaluate the system with other users, I think it's critical that you actually work in people with disabilities into the trial so you can see them in the space, in the vehicle over time. It is kind of amazing to me that we're considering planning this vehicle and this trial, and that there's a lot of time spent on what the accessibility requirements might be or must be in terms of the actual vehicle itself, but that there is not a lot of planning going into making sure that you see people with disabilities using the vehicle. So I just want to emphasize that I think that is a critical gap, and I hope that you'll be able to go back and address that. It's connected, I think, to a gap that the TTC generally has around understanding where people with disabilities sit and live in the city in general. So this is an aside, I apologize, but I was at the TTC service consultation. So they have a 5-year service plan that they're putting out into the world, and they were looking for public consultation on that. And I learned that you do have an equity mapping tool at the TTC that can tell you where equity-seeking groups live in terms of the city. But I learned that people with disabilities are not in the tool at all. There's no data on people with disabilities in that tool. So you could have potentially partnered with the folks who are doing that piece of work around equity mapping, except there's no presence of people with disabilities in your own tool. So I just wanted to point that out and say that that is a huge gap, and hopefully you'll be able to take that back to folks at the TTC and think about how we could address that. In the context of this project, it would be very helpful because you could have seen whether around Ridge Hill there were people with disabilities that could use the service too.
Thank you for that, and if I can just provide one follow-up comment, definitely I can take back that thinking around identifying where people are, and also just one clarification. Might want to find a better term than focus group, but the idea is that event would be happening once the vehicle is here, and there would be interaction with the vehicle with that what I'm calling focus group. But I think part of why it sounds vague is that we haven't really thought through what that activity will be. So I think your comments are really helpful in, yeah.
So is that a one-time event, or is that over time?
One or a few times, not, as you say, it wouldn't be part.
Okay, I think it's important to see something across time.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Thank you for flagging that. That was very helpful. I want to just, are there any other comments? If not, we want to just thank you, Lindsay, for your presentation. Sounds like a very interesting project that you're undertaking with a lot of big question marks and no path to a further outcome beyond let's just study this at this moment. Is that correct? There's no plans to scale up, there's no plan to expand routes, so let's just take a look because we're curious and we got the grant. But there isn't any desire to really roll this out in any mass way.
That's correct. Our 3 agencies would look at the results of the project and then make decisions from there.
Okay, super. Okay, so thank you very much, Lindsay, and I think you got some pretty good feedback from our committee. Thank you. And you're always welcome to come back.
Thanks.
So we are now going to So there's no action required for that. We will probably need a motion to receive the presentation. Can I get a motion to do that? Motion from Wendy. All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you. So our next item is 5.3, the temporary sign bylaw review. This particular presentation you would have seen before, and I know that Nagin had mentioned to me earlier before the meeting started that it has been circulated one more additional time. There was a question before the committee is, would you folks like to see the full presentation, or do you feel like you've now seen the presentation on the slide? I can see some nods. Maybe we can go right into the question portion. Would that be agreeable? Okay, does anybody have a burning desire for the full presentation? No? Okay. So Nagin, no need for the full presentation, but we are, I think we're going to provide you maybe with some comments and questions.
Are we talking about the signs?
Yes, that's correct. Did you want the presentation, Michael?
I think I'm fine. If I'm just to...
Yeah, okay, so we are on item number 3. And this particular piece was a little bit timely because, and one of the reasons we're actually having the special meeting of our TAC committee is because Nagin needs to take her presentation. She's presenting to the Planning and Housing Committee on Tuesday. So that's my committee, so I'll see you again on Tuesday. But for now, we can open up to those pages. Are there any particular questions? Sorry, folks, just to spring this on you. Maybe, Nagin, if I can ask you, can you just go through the timeline for us, and if that's all right?
The timeline of the project itself?
Yeah, that's correct.
So, yes. So we started the review, the temporary signs review, in the summer. In July and August, we did consultations, and we have since been doing a lot of research, jurisdictional scan work, looking at the permit data and the complaints data, and doing the analysis that we need to do. We went out again and connected with key stakeholders from industry, but also accessibility and other advocacy stakeholders to float the options that we were considering, received additional feedback at that point, and that was in recent weeks. And we are taking our report to Planning and Housing Committee on the 15th, and it will go to the council meeting of this cycle.
Okay, so then maybe I'll just kick off because I know you've got to get these comments in there. Accessibility, I mean, obviously having temporary signs pop up all over the sidewalk creates a huge impediment for anybody who actually needs a little bit of space to walk through the pedestrian clearway. And these signs are oftentimes unexpected. So at the very minimum, we have sidewalks that are cluttered with A-frames and portable signs and sometimes pop-up banners, and you're competing with the pedestrian clearway with newspaper boxes as well as cycling infrastructure, construction debris, porta potties. It just seems like everything is being stored on the city sidewalks these days. How do we ensure, because I think it comes down to an enforcement issue, how do we ensure we have some decent clear way for people who just need to go through the streets, whether you're using a mobility device or not? And this is the one thing I think is having a bylaw is great, but a bylaw that's not enforced means absolutely nothing.
So there are a couple of key recommendations that I think that affect the bylaw, but also you speak to the enforcement matters, and that is also very important. So a couple of the recommendations that I think would be supportive of what you're in addressing what you're describing. So similar to the review for the cafe patio and marketing displays that you heard about earlier this year, we are aligning the rules for the temporary signs, and that's A-frame and portable signs that you may see on the pedestrian clearway. So we're aligning them so that for those wider sidewalks that have the heavier traffic, that we are maintaining 2.5 meter clearway. The current standard is 2.1, and we're basically aligning it for those heavier pedestrian traffic sidewalks. So we are maintaining 2.1 for all other sidewalks. So that's one thing. And the other recommendation that you might have read in the deck that was circulated is that we are basically we're requiring that where it's permissible or feasible, that if you have a permit for an A-frame or a portable sign, that it be aligned with where the furnishing and planting zone currently is. So that is the first the first place that you should be trying to put it. And if it is not feasible to go there, but you are able to maintain the clearway that's required, then you would have it against the business wall, which is the current requirement that we are amending. And what we've heard is that having it against the business wall sometimes creates more of an impediment than if it were aligned with the furnishing zone. So there's that. And so that there is a little bit of streamlining with all the other things that are happening on the public right-of-way. And in terms of enforcement, one of the changes that I think will be really helpful for enforcement, well, there are a couple. One, that it seems like a minor one, but I do think that it will be helpful. The sticker that currently is issued for when you get a permit for your A-frame or portable sign, right now we don't really require, we don't have a requirement around where you place that sticker. So sometimes the enforcement staff have told us that you'll find it on the inside of the one of the faces. So now we're requiring it on the exterior so that it's very identifiable for pedestrians or anyone who may want to call in about a sign or want to know if a sign has a permit. And also, obviously, it would assist in our enforcement efforts. And second, we currently require, or there's a requirement in the bylaw, in the current bylaw, that when we collect a sign that isn't permitted, we have to hold it for 30 days. So we're removing that requirement right now. We're recommending that requirement be removed because that would assist in more expedited enforcement, because that is something that we heard that was a challenge.
Can you speak to me about your consideration on number 4, aligning portable and A-frame regulations by specifying that portable signs are not permitted along the right-of-way areas from Bloor Street East to Bloor Street West, between Avenue to Sherbourne, and along Yonge Street south to Davenport? Are you saying that that's a A-frame portable sign free zone?
Yes, it should be. So right now, that is a requirement for A-frames. And it seemed to us that it didn't make sense that portable signs shouldn't have to have the same requirements. So we are essentially, it's kind of a technical amendment where we're applying it for both, because both are found in the pedestrian clearway.
And I think, so coming back to the consideration around enforcement, right now, I think you could see A-frames in particular. They're everywhere within the catchment area that they're currently prohibited.
Mm-hmm.
So you're suggesting that by having the sign permit identifiers now affixed on the sign, perhaps correlating that with some type of affixment to the, is that also affixed to the window, or is that only on the sign?
It's only on the sign.
And so is that a strong enough tool to be used as an enforcement tool?
So
or do
we
you need
think
additional
that
levers?
The intent is that, combined with the removal of the 30-day storage requirement, in combination with some other, we're reviewing our enforcement practices around signs, and we're trying to find opportunities to streamline enforcement around signs and patios. So we are doing a lot of work in trying to get at the problem, and we do think that the combination of the 3 things will be very effective.
Okay, Thank you very much. I have no further questions. I do think Michael has a question.
Hi, I guess my first question is, how many signs are currently up right now? Just as an example.
So currently we have, in 2019, we had 82 permits, A-frame and portable permits issued. Obviously, that's not representative of what's actually happening in the city, and the intent behind this review is to have clearer rules around who needs a permit, do a push on education, and bring a lot of those signs that you see in the right-of-way into compliance and work with businesses to make sure that they're positioned where they should be, and where they're not permitted, that they aren't being erected.
And I'm just wondering if there could be an online tool for people with disabilities to identify where signs are currently located, and then they could perhaps plan their trip accordingly.
That's good feedback. I could take that back.
And I would also wonder if, by way of the permit process, we make a requirement that the signs be to some degree accessible, so that they use large lettering, that they use high contrast. For blind users like my friend here, perhaps there could be a website that they could be directed to read the content of the sign. So by making people do the work to be more accessible, maybe you have less signs as a result.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Michael, anything else? Sorry. Any more questions? Okay, thank you, Michael. Any other members with questions or comments? We'll just pool them all together. Okay. I see none. Anyone to speak? Oh, sorry. Michelle, please go ahead.
Sorry, it just came to me. I'm just jumping off of Michael's point. Thank you for your presentation. I was just wondering, with the sticker, definitely it could be made accessible. Would it be possible to even have something on the sticker that you could scan with your phone to make reporting more easy and anonymous? And then I feel like I would report more if I could just do it really quickly on my phone versus having to call a line or submit it in a different manner.
That's good feedback. I could take that back. That's not currently what we're considering. We do want to make it a bright color and make it identifiable, similar to what we did with clothing drop boxes earlier this year. We want to make it very identifiable signage or stickers. So I'll take that back, though.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Michael, you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out the fact that before your comment, I didn't even know that we could report these signs that are not in compliance. So I think more awareness needs to be done, that there's a reporting mechanism in place. And in addition to the phone calls, we should be able to have an online form, because I can't use the phone. Right? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Anyone else? So I'm just going to come back to enforcement. I'm sorry. When the sign is identified as being illegal or not permitted, doesn't have any of the requisite paper, the time of complaint and the time of removal, what would that estimated time be, approximately?
I don't have that with me, but that's something that I can look into.
Okay. And then also, because if it takes too long, then people will think that their complaint went nowhere. That's the reason I raise it. And then also, who's responsible to remove it? So if the property owner or the business operator does not remove the sign, will MLS come along and take it and throw it away?
So that is something that, once it's escalated to that point, obviously the intent is to bring businesses into compliance. So we would probably start with education and working with the business owner, operator, to see if there is a solution that makes sense. One, for them to get a permit, but also the placement of it, for them to provide that site plan so that it's placed appropriately on the right-of-way.
Okay.
And then that would be an escalated step.
And then for those businesses or perhaps those services that are located within the prohibition area, the portable sign-free area, the A-frame sign-free area, for those particular businesses, there is no need to report, and you're not going to be issuing any permits. Is that correct?
That's right. Where they're not permitted, then we would probably start with asking for the removal, and then after that, take steps to remove it.
Okay. So then, logistically, how long will it take for us to see the sidewalks within that catchment area free of those signs?
That's something that I can take away and work with our enforcement staff to get a number. days.
And thank you. And is there an appeal process? So for example, sometimes there's a prohibition area, but businesses like to appeal to their local councillors, and then it becomes a political decision that may override even a bylaw decision. Will there be an appeal process?
There isn't, no.
There is no appeal process, so you wouldn't even, there's no form to submit an appeal on. Okay. That's the end of my questions. Anyone else? No? Okay, just quick thoughts, I think. I want to thank you for coming forward with your presentation. This one was, I suspect, very highly anticipated, largely because after the sidewalk patio review, it really did come out of those discussions that there was so much that was sitting in the way of the sort of the planting zone, the furniture zone. There wasn't a lot of space left for people. And for those who are traveling with sort of mobility device, there was even less space for those individuals. So I think that what you're doing is very important. I think that I suspect that we're going to get significant complaints from business owners who may have invested in an A-frame, developers who've got their sandwich boards all over the downtown area and beyond the city. I think that we will end up having a bit of a sign war over how to remove it. So my suggestion, and I've sort of alluded to it, is that enforcement has got to be swift. I don't believe there needs to be a heck of a lot of education, especially when the education is, you're not supposed to have an illegal sign, we need you to take it off the sidewalk. And I don't necessarily think that we need to go through months and season-long progressive education, because they know that their signs were illegal. That's my experience so far as a local councillor. They know it's illegal. They just think that the city is not going to do anything about it. So they'll take their chances and they'll hope that they can get away with it, and many businesses and services have, and oftentimes they will put their signs in front of what I've seen is pedestrian cross signals. They'll put their signs in front of other people's signs, and business signs that have blade signs or perhaps legally permitted signs, and it ends up being a bit of a sign war out there on the sidewalk. Oftentimes it takes place on the side of a building, but when the sign war hits the sidewalks, who loses are obviously pedestrians and people who need to walk and use those sidewalks. So I'm just going to suggest you don't need to tread too lightly, especially for a geographical area that has a prohibition on it. And thank you once again for coming forward. Okay. So we're moving on to item number. Oh, sorry, I keep forgetting this. I don't know what's wrong with me today. Can I please have a motion to receive the presentation? Motion from Jason, thank you. All those in favor? That carries. Okay. So item number 4, single-use and takeaway item reduction strategy, phase 2 consultation. We're going to welcome you folks back here. And this would be our last item. We'll let you guys settle in, but we're hearing from Annette Sinowick, Interim Director of Policy, Planning and Outreach, and Charlotte Etta, from Manager, Solid Waste Policy and Planning.
Thank you very much for having us here this morning. Charlotte and I will be here to answer any questions that you have after the presentation. Today's presentation mainly focuses on a bit of an update again and a review of what we were consulting on in our first phase of consultation and development of the single-use packaging strategy. And we'll also be reporting some minor updates to the presentation that you would have received as there's been some changes made. I'll identify those slides as they come up. So again, to review what we're talking about when we use the terminology single-use or takeaway packaging, it's really what we're considering as a product that is designed for a primary only single-use purpose. So it doesn't matter if that product can go to our green bin, our blue bin, or our garbage. These products are not designed for any type of durability or reuse, and these are the products that we're looking to address through our single-use and takeaway items reduction strategy. We also want to note that it is material agnostic, so we're not suggesting that a single-use bag that might be made out of paper is any better or worse than a plastic bag, or even if a product is labeled as compostable, we're not suggesting that you move to an alternative. What we're doing is to reduce the use of these items in the City of Toronto. We also wanted to recognize that throughout this phase of consultation and their past phase of consultation, we are definitely promoting that there are accessibility issue potentials or challenges that could be faced as we go through implementing some mandatory measures for how to reduce these items. We're aware that some single-use items support accessibility for individuals with disabilities, and we want to make sure that any programs that come into place need to be very inclusive so that everyone can participate. We also wanted to note that all of the consultations that we're doing in this phase have been made fully accessible. So we heard from the Toronto Accessibility and Advisory Council that instead of having specifically focused accessibility meetings, all of our meetings and consultations have been made accessible. A reminder that the work in developing a reduction strategy also supports the city's master plan for solid waste called the Long-Term Waste Management Strategy. Specifically, there was a recommendation in the long-term waste management strategy that said that we need to assess where greater waste reduction can be achieved via the banning of certain packaging and products and imposing levies, mandating source separation, and implementing disposal bans where possible. The waste strategy also heavily promoted that we increase how much we promote education over waste reduction. As many of you are aware, that this is not an isolated issue that is specific to Toronto. There is also federal and provincial actions and intentions underway. We've been having conversations with both levels of government, informing them of the consultation that we're doing. And when the City of Toronto approves a final waste reduction strategy for single-use and takeaway items, we'll be informing the provincial government and the federal government at that time as well. So again, the goals and objectives of this phase of consultation is to get to a single-use and takeaway items reduction strategy for Toronto. We want to reduce the generation of these items. We know that if these items go into our waste streams, not only do they cost more for the taxpayer, but they're also not as having good environmental outcomes. And if they are not managed in our waste management system, they can also end up as litter that takes away from our enjoyment of public spaces. Just repeating what we heard in phase 1 consultation regarding accessibility. This is something that I think is very important that we've been sharing in phase 2. Often we hear from certain stakeholder groups that they want us to go faster and very restrictive in how we approach the use of these items or reduction of these items, but I think it's very important to mention that sometimes these items are needed for eating and drinking, water bottles for hydration, for safety reasons, or even for food delivery and meal programs. In one of our previous presentations previous to this one, we mentioned that we'll be using the Equity Lens tool. So it was good to hear from Wendy to know that it doesn't have necessarily an accessibility component. Oh, the TTC one? Okay. So definitely a final waste reduction strategy, or final single-use items and takeaway items reduction strategy will also go through the city's Equity Lens tool. What we heard from members of the committee last time is that when communicating any of this work in the future, that anything in the public realm should be accessible. We should use Braille where possible, large text, and contrasting colors. And again, we've already implemented in this phase of consultation that we don't want to have specific accessible focused consultation, but include accessibility in all consultations, and our public consultation unit has helped us to do that. We also heard from the committee last time that it's sometimes not a matter of convenience, but health and safety, that some of these items are used. That glassware as an alternative could be dangerous if it was dropped and broken, and that sometimes voluntary measures like incentives could be a barrier if they're not implemented in the same way. We're also asked to provide a list of alternatives of where possible, and we'd look at providing that in our voluntary measures in the future. So in terms of wanting to bring to the committee the ways in which we are consulting right now during this phase, we did hold our first public webcast and public meeting on September 24th. It was well attended. I think over 200 people were in attendance, plus 100 online listening in up in council chambers. We also held specific stakeholder meetings that included businesses, accessibility organizations, not-for-profit groups, business improvement areas, as well as restaurants and manufacturers of packaging, just to name a few. So these have been very well attended. I believe around 60 to 65 different types of organizations were present in those meetings. The most recent one was just held this Monday. We also just had a telephone town hall in order to maybe make our consultations accessible to those that might not have been able to come out to the ones that are in person. Our first one was last night, and we encourage members of the committee to attend the next town hall on October 24th. So it's a telephone town hall. Members are able to call in or view on their computer and watch and participate. If they choose to, they can call in or have the question read out for them if they don't want to actually ask the question in person, or they can type it in as well. In terms of notifying other agencies and city divisions, we've definitely been working across the city to highlight that we are working on this to spread the message of these consultations. We're actually very proud to say that this is a topic of strong public interest in the City of Toronto. In speaking with our public consultation unit, this is one of the most civically engaging topics so far. So our first consultation had over 20,000 responses, which is very, very high for policymaking. We've used extensive citywide print and digital advertising campaigns in order to advertise how people can get involved in this phase of consultations. And we've been sending out the invitations to those stakeholder meetings to over 300 organizations, 100 plus accessibility and social service providers as well. And we made a request for TAC and the Clerks Accessibility Network to also help us promote this phase of consultation. Specifically in phase 2, what we're looking for is feedback on the approaches being considered for reduction on specific single-use and takeaway items and implementation considerations, including timing. So in our first phase, what we asked for is for the public and stakeholders to identify what items that we should be focusing on. And now we've narrowed it down to a list of 5 groupings, which I'll talk about on subsequent slides, and basically laid out a high-level timeline of how we would approach some mandatory measures at reducing those items. Several possible approaches are being considered and timelines being implemented. We're still seeking public and stakeholder feedback. So one of the things that we want to communicate is that nothing has been decided. These are a proposed set of mandatory measures for a single-use and takeaway items reduction strategy, and we're looking for the public's feedback and stakeholder feedback at this time. There's been several guiding principles that have been referred to in order to develop the reduction strategy. In addressing these items, we'd look at if they're effectively recycled in the city's Toronto Blue Bin or Green Bin program. So are they problematic materials, and what impact do they currently have on the waste management system? How prevalent are they as litter on our lake, on our city streets and shorelines? And what are we hearing in terms of survey and polling data on how to address these items? Finally, we're looking at how do any future reduction strategies harmonize with policies at different levels of government? So this is, I think, maybe more what you may be interested in is the targeted items that we're addressing. So in 2021, we're looking at addressing single-use eating utensils, so anything like forks, cutlery, chopsticks. In 2021, we're also looking at addressing single-use plastic and paper bags. In 2022, we're looking at having mandatory measures to address single-use hot and cold drink cups made of any material. And in 2022, we're also looking at expanded polystyrene foam and takeout containers and single-use straws. The mandatory mechanisms that are being looked at in order to address the use of these items, in order to get towards reducing them, we're looking at a buy request or ask first bylaw for eating utensils and single-use straws. And what this could look like is the retailer would be required to ask the customer whether or not they would need this type of implement, or they would be having it behind the counter and the customer would be required to ask for the use of that product. In terms of a fee bylaw, we're looking at having fees placed on single-use and plastic and paper bags, as well as single-use hot and cold drink cups. So basically here, a retailer would be required to charge a certain fee on the use of those items as they're distributed, and that fee would be charged to the consumer, and it would be on a per product basis. So if you ordered 2 coffees to go, it would be 2 fees. Finally, we're looking at a ban on foam and takeaway containers and cups. Beyond the mandatory measures that we're suggesting, we're also wanting to have voluntary measures in place to support reduction. So that could include encouraging businesses to self-report, where they might have some incentives or reduction programs in place. We know that there are some restaurants now that are voluntarily doing this, where they've had implemented their own used container program for a small fee deposit. We know that there's BIAs that have gone towards reduce programs, where they're identifying through kind of sticker certification in that area. So how can we showcase those best practices to make them more prevalent throughout the city? We're also looking at exploring pilots and partnerships with restaurants. So that could be done potentially through our Community Waste Reduction Grants program. And we're looking at having reduction activities that support behavior changes, such as pledge programs for residents and businesses, as well as recognition awards or case studies. What to expect in terms of implementing this after our consultation is done. Basically, our consultation is open until November 4th at this time. Following that, I'm sure staff will have many comments to review and to analyze and kind of summarize all of those data results. From there, would be continuing to update any jurisdictional scans. It seems almost on a daily basis another jurisdiction is taking action to ban or reduce the use of these items. So we'd make sure that we're taking a look at how prevalent or the timing of some of those other plans underway. We'd look at how potentially we can form these future bylaws should the reductions plan be approved by council. And in 2020, in the second quarter, we'd be presenting those findings to committee and council. If approved, we would move to starting to make the bylaws and then have them put in place starting in 2021 and then 2022. All doing so, again, with other city divisions that would help us enforce the bylaws. We'd also work with affected businesses, so we know that they'll take some time in order to be educated on how to implement some of these mandatory measures, and continue with promotion and education so that we can get the behavior change what we're looking for. And finally, if the reduction strategy and when it is approved by council in 2020, the first mandatory measure would be put in place in 2021. And that's currently what we're proposing for the waste reduction strategy. And finally, if you have any questions regarding consultation or how to find more information on our single-use and takeaway items reduction strategy, we have our dedicated email, wastestrategy@toronto.ca, as well as a dedicated phone line, 416-392-3760. And you can also go online at www.toronto.ca/single-use. And again, we're looking at closing this phase of consultation on November 4th. Charlotte and I are here to answer any questions you may have.
Annette, thank you very much for your presentation. Just turning to the committee members, are there any questions? Starting with Liv and then Wendy.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It's very thorough and interesting. I have a question around the single-use items that people would have to request or be offered, the straws and containers. Will there be any education planning around the fact that there are accessibility needs around those types of single-use items? I know many businesses have already eliminated straws, and there have been incidences of customers with disabilities actually being shamed for requesting them or using them. So I'm wondering if there's any public education component to this that will highlight that while the strategy is to reduce and eliminate certain items, that there are items that people need for particular accessibility purposes.
Thank you for your question through the chair. Yes, we definitely want to have an accessibility education component. So if we can get comments on how you think that might be best be managed, we'd be also happy to come back to TAC with how we're approaching that once we have that in place or drafted.
Thank you.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. Wendy, to question.
Hello again. We saw each other just at one of the last consultations on this issue, so it's nice to see you both. I wanted to ask a question around the items that are associated with fees. I know that part of what you're looking at is assigning additional fees to some of these plastic items. And so, you know, for people with disabilities who are on very limited incomes, this could have a dramatic impact on their incomes if every time they buy a coffee, they're going to be spending additional money. How are you considering the impact of those fees on groups like people with disabilities?
Thank you for the question, Wendy. So yes, that's as we were looking at the policies and approaches, that was one of the potential impacts that the fee may have on individuals living with disabilities or with those on low income. So we are reaching out to those communities to get that feedback and comment on how this proposed policy approach could impact them, and definitely we'll take into consideration those comments that we received through the we're going out to the neighborhood improvement areas, as well as through different community partners tables, specifically again engaging those different potential affected sectors of the population for their feedback. And similarly, as Annette mentioned, we are have our meetings or consultation events try to make them accessible through the teletown halls, as well as the in-person meetings, as well as being able to go online and complete the survey. So that's something that we will be taking through the equity tool to see how we can make sure that we try to make the policies aren't negatively impacting those individuals with disabilities or those with low income.
And through the chair, just to add to that, we recognize that it could be a barrier, the fee. So when we structured the online survey, we actually had, instead of proposing a certain fee amount, there's a range of different fees, whether it be 10 cents, 5 cents, other, or no fee. So there's still an option to state that no fee is what is preferred to address the use of that item.
Thank you. Anyone else with questions? Yes, of course, please go ahead.
Can I ask a clarifying question? So you said that you are reaching out to organizations that work with people with disabilities and other groups that might be impacted. How are you reaching out to them?
Through the chair, I'll refer that to our public consultation unit.
Hi. So we have a stakeholder list that's pretty extensive. There's about 350 organizations on it, including 100 accessibility organizations. So that would be our primary mode in terms of our outreach. And then we've also sent information through this committee as well as the clerk's accessibility list. So those contacts are invited to all of our consultations and stakeholder meetings. If there were additional requests, we would look into how the staff team could accommodate either presentations or meeting with those groups.
To add to that, also all of the webcast is available online. The presentation is also in a Word format as well as PowerPoint format, so anybody that needs to have access to previous presentations is there, and it's also on YouTube. So if you have another organization that's interested, you feel may be interested, we could definitely send them an email to get them linked up with how to get more information on this phase of consultation.
Fantastic, thank you. Anyone else with questions? Okay, maybe I'm just going to toss a few of them. With respect to timelines, I recognize that there's a timeline around 21, 22 on, I guess, decisions to be made, but then implementation and the public awareness campaign, and then rolling out to all the businesses, that's a different timeline. So the decision-making timeline is 21, 22 here internally, but then what might be the rollout timeline you folks are contemplating?
So we're proposing that so you're right, correct, that the planning would take place primarily in 2020, with the first potential bylaw being in place in 2021, and that would be for the buy request or ask first bylaw for the eating utensils. So that would, so essentially, yeah, so the planning there would be that we can also look for feedback through stakeholders and residents, as well as our other city divisions. Even possibly looking at a phased implementation where, although the bylaw may be enforced, there might be a bit of a grace period where it's more of an education awareness, and then followed up by a more of like a stricter enforcement later on partway through the year. So that's part of the conversation we're hoping to have through this phase 2 consultation to see what would be the appropriate phase out rollout of those proposed mandatory measures.
And then with respect to sort of getting to the single-use plastic issue or the single-use container issue upstream as opposed to downstream, by the time it reaches the consumer, the choices are quite limited. How much effort is actually being used to explore how to ensure that those who produce the products that we consume can actually think through how they can do much more of an effective job of reducing the single-use component, because by the time it reaches the consumer, it seems like the options are, you don't have as much choice. How much of that work is upstream?
Yeah, so certainly this is an item that's being looked at the federal level as well as the provincial level, looking to even taking stricter approaches to potentially even banning certain materials. But of course, the provincial government recently announced the transition of the Blue Box recycling program to producers. So this essentially moves the current system to an extended producer responsibility model where manufacturers of packaging, plastic packaging, printed paper will be held fully financially and operationally responsible for the packaging that they put out into the system, into the market. So again, for those that are creating and designing those products, they're the most hopefully incentivized to look for ways to reduce the amount of virgin materials used to create their products. And although the regulations have not been drafted yet, there are these sort of, I guess, the legislation or guiding principles to say that they're to design their packages with reduction as well as mitigate or minimize the impact to environment in mind. So the city is actively engaged in that file to support the transition towards extended producer responsibility.
So you're saying that it's actually happening on both ends?
Correct.
And the work is somewhat coordinated and is happening concurrently, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then finally, I recognize that there's a desire to charge if someone is not necessarily, if someone requires a single-use container. What about providing a discount? So, or I just want to make sure I'm not losing myself in semantics here, but to incentivize by reducing the cost to, as opposed to charging someone.
Our understanding is that we don't have the regulatory mechanism to require the retailer to have the discount. So any incentive would have to be a voluntary measure that retailer would choose as part of their business processes.
Oh, okay. So, and because it's voluntary then, you're going to have a bit of a scattered approach. Like I don't think it, unless it's streamlined right across, voluntary programs to reduce, reuse, that hasn't always provided the most maximum results and the best results for us. Is that correct?
That's correct. And the City of Toronto did have a successful 5-cent fee program up until 2012, which was deemed successful.
Yeah, I was there.
So we do have success in using a fee mechanism on products, and we did find that actually changed the behavior that we wanted to. So we're suggesting a fee specifically for bags. We didn't go towards banning bags because we know that at times, sometimes the bags can be used for participation in our green bin program. So that's the reason why we chose the fee on the bags.
Okay.
One of the reasons.
An observation is that bags became, I mean, it's because bags are collapsible, they can sort of fold and put into someone's pocket or into a larger sort of purse. The objects that are being asked to be carried by individuals are sizable, so these are containers and mugs. And is there any thought about creating new products? And I know this is not necessarily with the city's purview, but like it's the convenience factor that people are looking for, and it's very difficult to ask people to go back to sort of, you know, carrying a lot of containers, and especially if you have mobility challenges, or if you're even a caregiver to carrying a child and your heavy groceries bag, there isn't a lot of space left. So is there any consideration, or is there a group that's actually studying reusable materials that are actually functional and they take up less space? Because and the reason being is because, you know, even carrying a takeaway coffee mug, if you're trying to put it into your bag plus your lunch pails, I think one of the reasons why it's not necessarily working is because it just takes up a lot of space. And if you're trying to take food home for a family of 4, that's a lot of containers that you've got to carry into the restaurant.
Yep, and that's great feedback. And so one of the things that the city staff are looking at is, I'm not aware of at this moment in time a group that's looking at alternative materials that take up less space or maybe less volume. But part of the work that we're doing here is to look for innovative, reusable container food and drink beverage containers solutions. So we have been, through consultation, heard from many residents that there are some programs that are operating in other jurisdictions where a group of restaurants or a group of businesses would come together and actually have like a reusable container program where, you know, there might be a small deposit on a container where they can use that to, you know, have their food or beverage placed in, and they can drop it off somewhere after they eat out of it, and then it gets washed, and then they can pick it up at another establishment. So those are some of the opportunities that we're looking and exploring to see if we can maybe pilot some of them here in the City of Toronto.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very helpful to know. Any other questions or comments at this point in time? Wendy, go ahead.
I just wanted to comment a little bit on fees as well. And, you know, it sounds to me like the reaching out is kind of around the invitations to the consultations versus the question of fees specifically. And I guess I would just encourage you to see if you can find some space and time to connect with equity-seeking groups on this question of the fee. You know, people on ODSP live on $1,200 a month. You know, and so if you're actually trying to go out and buy a coffee regularly, or you know, engage in things that people with bigger incomes don't notice, it could quite quickly add up in terms of the impact. I also wanted to just say, you know, around the equity lens tool that you're using, the one I was referring to, and we clarified this a little bit, but it was at a TTC meeting around the service plan that this equity mapping tool was mentioned, and I asked questions about whether people with disabilities were in the data, and the response was no. If you are using an equity mapping tool of some kind, please ensure that people with disabilities are in there. It seems to be a question with no answer, right? So we want to be able to do things for people with disabilities, but we don't seem to include them in our populations when we're studying it. We're here as representatives of those folks to say we're in the city and we need to be represented. So if that's not in your equity lens tool, find out how you can address that. There was some comment at the consultation that I was at as well around reusable food containers, and, you know, some thoughts on how those could be integrated. Just again, as a caution, that reusable food containers probably require people to, or maybe would require people to clean and sanitize them before they return them or bring them back to a place. And some of those things are things that are going to be very difficult for people with disabilities, depending on their access to transit, which is, we know, is actually becoming more limited, and their access to somebody to support them to undertake those tasks. So if somebody only has, you know, 4 hours of home care or personal support worker assistance a week, they don't want all of that time taken up with sanitizing reusable food containers. So, you know, is there a way of thinking about that in terms of moving forward? And just to come back to the fees, is there even a possibility? I know Councillor Wong Tam was saying, how about a discount if you're using reusable items? Is there even a possibility of an exemption on the fees for people of, with particularly low incomes, so that those prices don't become prohibitive for them? So that's it for me. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Wendy, thank you for your comments. And Liv?
Just a quick thought around the sanitation process. If people are doing this in their home, just keeping in mind the issue of food allergies and what could occur if sanitation is done individually rather than in a organized mechanism. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else to speak? No? Okay, so I want to thank staff for your presentation. Thanks for coming to us twice within the year. You're obviously ahead of the curve in so many ways. The work that you're doing is quite advanced. It's the type of thinking that is required if we're going to be moving towards sustainability overall. I also recognize it's a very complicated policy review that you're undertaking, and there's many tangential pieces that are feeding into it. So I just want to thank you, because I don't think it's necessarily the easiest file that you have, and I suspect it's going to be mired in a bit of lobbying, especially from the plastics lobby, as well as those who are just going to be a bit more resistant on any of this sort of change, regardless of whether or not the planet is at risk or not. Getting things to change is not necessarily easy, so I just want to acknowledge that you've got a difficult file, but we thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. And so with that, if I can get a motion to receive the presentation from staff. Wendy, all those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you. So we were able to sort of zip along and get through our meeting very quickly, which is always good. My fear about not having this meeting and doubling up with the next one is that we would be then rushed through November. But before we come to a conclusion, I just want to number one, thank those in the room who are providing us support. Marlene, Victoria, thank you for your participation today. Craig in the AV room. And I do have one motion. We've got some members who were not able to join us, but I think that we can excuse their absence. My motion is that we excuse the absence of Karima Iwig, Miranda Frey, Michael Maselli, Glenn Hart, and Stephanie Marinich Lee from the October the 11th, 2019 tax special meeting. All those in favor? Any opposed? Those members are excused for their absence. And if I may, our next... Sorry? Oh, yes. Did Craig take your screen? No, but I can remind them. Okay, yeah, so Deidre was actually highlighting for me just a reminder for the members at the committee is that we have to formally excuse absences from the meeting because if you've missed 3 meetings, you're automatically removed from the committee now. So we want everyone to participate. That's why we advanced the schedule so early. So make sure you have those dates plugged in your calendar. Which brings me to one last point. I generally like to have some type of celebration at our last meeting coming to the end of the year. I recognize that our next meeting is November the 1st. So what I'm going to ask is all of you, if you can stay with us after the 12:30 cutoff, what I'd like to do is bring in a catered lunch, and maybe we celebrate the end of the 2019 period a little bit earlier. I know we're not quite into December yet, but it gives you lots of time to attend all those other holiday parties. But we're going to have our special lunch at the end of November 1st. So please make sure you make accommodations for your transportation. I'd love for you to all stay, and this of course is an extension to everybody else who comes out to join our meetings, including the members of the public. We will be providing a catered lunch that day. I think that brings us to the end of the meeting. Is there anything else? Seeing none, then the meeting is adjourned, and thank you very much everyone for coming out today.